Welcome to How to Yu-Gi-Oh!
Let's explain where we are now, part 1.
Chapter 1.
So in this video, I'm going to talk about where we are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now in the game, obviously in terms of the season and competitive scene, and how that will shape how I believe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in the TCG. With that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video.
Chapter 2.
As you can see on the slide, it tells us where we are now. To understand where we are now in Yu-Gi-Oh!, my fellow students, you need to realize what happened to TCG last year. In 2024, all the generic negates, omni negates, were banned. And by the end of the year, there were no more generic negates, omni negates anymore. Now, you might ask yourself, what does that have to do with the format to where we are now? How does that matter? Well, it matters in this way. Combo decks, especially in TCG and OCG, have been flourishing on the fact that they could always use Omni Negates as training wheels to essentially just coast and ride, and just have a free ride and enter the competitive scene for free.
Coincidence? I think not.
They didn't really need to be very strong, and you didn't really need to have a lot of knowledge in Yu-Gi-Oh! Omni Negates generally were a cheat code for loads of players who didn't really know the game and just put a lot of Omni Negates in your deck, and you had a really good deck. You didn't really need to know Yu-Gi-Oh! At that point. It was fairly simple. You could calculate it, the meta was predictable, competitive scene was predictable, and everything followed a linear pathway. But with the start of 2025 and all the generic Omni Negates gone, this is now a completely different landscape. And the only generic, and we don't have generic Omni Negates anymore, we have type negation. Type negation is negation locked to archetypes. For example, as you can see in front of you, Azamina, Ilya Sylvia, and Fiendsmith Desiree. Now, you ask yourself, how comes we're in this format and we have these engines? Why is it that we don't see them in the competitive scene in the TCG, right? Are we not dominated by negation? Let me answer that, my fellow students. The reason why we're not dominated by negation is that these engines, type negation, is very different from generic omni negation. Type negation requires archetypes. This means it requires a lot of sacrifice and a lot of cost. To get a type negation like Azamina, Ilya Sylvia, you have to play a big Azamina package. This means your consistency is going to drop, and the only thing you'll be able to do is, for example, play Azamina Sylvia and SP Little Knight. While yes, you could combine it with Fiendsmith Desiree, but here's the problem. When you combine Azamina and Fiendsmith, your extra deck space is extremely tight and you have no room or wiggle space. That is the price. It's either you have one negate or you have this negate. You can't pick and choose. You can't have both. And if you do try to have both, well, it's sort of like you try to please everyone, but please no one. That's essentially where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is right now, and that is the conundrum that combo players find themselves in the TCG at the moment. There is no generic negate in the game. This means that archetypes now have to stand on their own merit. Archetypes now, you actually have to know Yu-Gi-Oh! To play at the competitive level. This is a completely different way, and TCG is having a rude awakening. Loads of players, especially competitive players, were not really competitive players, especially when they played the game physically, as they were relying on a crutch, which was generic negates. And these generic negates would essentially carry their decks to the competitive scene and would carry them to the high league tables. What removing generic negates has done for Yu-Gi-Oh! Has basically weeded out the true player, the people who really know Yu-Gi-Oh, to the people who don't. And a lot of people you find in Yu-Gi-Oh don't really know the game that well, especially when they don't have negates to handhold them or to help them play their deck quickly and efficiently. I've always seen generic negates, omni negates, as training wheels, as crutches. These are things that do not make you a better player in Yu-Gi-Oh!
I like monkey business.
When you put generic omni negates in your deck, it is surely, I see it as pure and utter laziness, right? Using your archetypes, for example, negation that you have, the archetype that you're playing, adding different negation from other archetypes into your deck, that is skillful gameplay in my eyes. That is being creative. However, using a generic negate where you don't have to invest in it at all, not having to ask difficult questions, not having to do anything to put your negation on the board, that to me is not difficult at all. And that is where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is at the moment. Negation is now a hard currency. And it's a currency now in the TCG that not many decks have. All the decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! All do not have negation. And we only have Azamina and Fiendsmith Desiree to rely on.
Chapter 3.
So we go into this slide, and I was saying that we only have the Azamina Sylvia and the Desiree to rely on. On this slide, you can see that there's a barrier to entry. Right now, Nibiru, Malchami Fiolos, and Malchami Pirelli, as you can see in front of you, are the barrier to entry for competitive decks. Before that, it was only Nibiru. Now, you might ask yourself, what does this have to do with why Yu-Gi-Oh! In the TCG at the moment is extremely healthy? This means, because there's no generic negates, omni negates anymore, Nibiru is now that more powerful. That also means that Nibiru now works as a check in balance so that combo decks cannot go out of control. This means now Nibiru is automatically respected and no one is making stupid boards, which is the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Is supposed to be. Another thing as well, with Malchami Fiolos and Malchami Pirelli in the game, these three cards' existence, what they mean for competitive scene is that now the brakes has been put on in terms of you making stupid and silly boards. If your board is going to be making something silly or something stupid, or you're trying to extend for no reason, you know that Fiolos exists, you know that Pirelli exists, so you are not encouraged to do that. And as a result, now you are making far weaker boards, but boards that can be broken and boards that are healthy. And in TCG, my big speculation with this is that we're going to be seeing disruption over negation. The reason why, for example, we see that Ryziel Fiendsmith is the best deck in TCG right now is because it is the only deck which can consistently have a negation, right? Bear this in mind. Negation now in the TCG is a hard currency. All the generic omni negates are gone, right? Fiendsmith is the only generic negate we have that is easy to implement for players. Now, if in the next ban list per se, the Konami were to, like, let's say ban Fiendsmith Desiree, combo players and combo decks in general are gonna be in freefall in the TCG. Because there will be no more generic negates in Yu-Gi-Oh! As Konami, as with the future sets that we see so far that have been produced, there is no negates. So what this will mean is that any archetype that has an archetype negate is going to be one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's obviously under the assumption that the next ban list we have bans Fiendsmith Desiree. I think in my eyes, banning Fiendsmith Desiree would be a really, really smart move from Konami. Not only would it mean that Fiendsmith is still in the game as an engine, because in my eyes, I think that the Fiendsmith package is alright. But I think having an engine that just gives you a free negate, I think omni negate, is wrong. You shouldn't have that negate. You shouldn't be able to just have a way to just slap negates to every single deck. No, 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 no. It doesn't work like that. You should have to pay the price and obviously not have it for free. I think that would be the smartest thing to do in my eyes, and I think Konami should do that. And in my hot take, I see it happening. Desiree is a super, it's a common. This is not exactly a rare card. It's not expensive or anything. These negates are not like expensive, so I can definitely see Konami and TCG banning it. But outside of that, I have hope for the TCG because things are looking great, right? And where we are now in Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially in the TCG, is an extremely healthy place. And I believe we will still be in a healthy place, especially after the first ban list that we will have in the TCG for this year. I definitely do feel the bans. I think like if the bans, we are not going to be hitting Ryziel, but we're going to be hitting the cards related to Ryziel, possibly. I speculate, are we going to be following the OCG and hitting Abyss Dweller? I don't think so. I think the best hit, in my eyes, I think would be you ban Desiree. I think banning Desiree is fantastic. I think as well, banning Azamina Sylvia would be fantastic. I think those two bans, in my eyes, I think is very good for Yu-Gi-Oh! And very good for the game. I don't want generic. I think with what Konami has shown us from last year, we should remove all forms of generic Omni Negates from the game. Disruption is healthy. Disruption is where Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be. There's nothing wrong with this, right? What is a problem is that when every deck is able to play, right, or slot in a negate for simply no reason. And with Azamina and whatever, so I think it's best you ban the cards that negate rather than banning the engine themselves. I think that's what was done last year. That's what we should do this year. So that is my hot take. And I'll go over to the next slide to conclude this point.
Chapter 4.
And so as you can see on this slide, we're going to be having an engine that's coming out pretty soon, which is Blue Eyes. Blue Eyes, by the time of this video, should be out now as a structure deck, and we should see Primite now. You should see Primite on the screen with Drill Beam. And now you ask yourself, and you're asking me, my fellow students, why is Blue Eyes so hyped in the TCG? First of all, I think we need to realize where we are now, especially in the TCG. Negates are a currency and they're currently lacking for a combo player. They look into the landscape and things are not looking good in the future. Possibly we know for a fact that Fiendsmith is going to get hit. So Desiree definitely getting banned definitely looks something that is on the table. Fiendsmith getting hit is a surefire, is a sure thing at this point. And Azamina getting hit, well, catching strays, that's a sure thing at this point to promote new product.
I can't deny that. It's just the truth at this point.
So again, these are things that are a surety because we're going to be promoting Blue Eyes. And when I look at Blue Eyes right now, Blue Eyes is in a very sexy place right now, especially in the TCG, because again, it's at full power, it's got new support, it can use Primite, it's got a negate, first of all, so the hard currency is now fulfilled with this archetype. But most importantly, there are so many things going for Blue Eyes and so many support that is coming to help Blue Eyes with Regenesis that's coming out in Alliance Insight, and possibly we have Dragon Rulers as well. There's just too many things that are coming to support Dragons as a whole that Blue Eyes is looking very strong when Worlds comes into the forefront. Because we're definitely going to be having a ban list before Worlds, that's for sure, and Fiendsmith in TCG is gonna get hit. That's just a foregone conclusion. We're not going to be hitting Ryziel, that's a fact. We're going to be hitting Fiendsmith. And hitting Fiendsmith, and if, as I speculate, they do ban Desiree, Fiendsmith Desiree, that is going to be absolutely huge. I think it will be one of the smartest hits that Konami and TCG can ever do. I think not only will it be something that no one will expect, because most players will be expecting the link 2, the closed moon link 2 that is used, but banning Desiree will be huge. And I also think banning as well as Amina Sylvia will be huge as well. But I doubt that's going to take place. I doubt Azamina is going to take a shot here because it gets support in Alliance Insight. So I do feel that Desiree has a huge target on its back. And if we do lose, and because Desiree is a card that we see very often in boards, if, like, for whatever reason in the next ban list that they ban Desiree and also ban the DDD Wave King Caesar, that kills the Fiendsmith engine. Those two bans kill the Fiendsmith engine. And what does this mean? This means that in TCG, there will be no Omni Negates in the game. And as a combo player, when that happens, combo is completely, for all intents and purposes at that point, dead on arrival. Because we have cards in place that will keep combo in check now. With Nibiru that exists in the game and Mulcharmies that exist in the game, no longer can combo run amok and run rampant. And when that happens, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to enter, as I like to call, a free-for-all where everything can compete. And at that stage, well, Yu-Gi-Oh! Will essentially, in the TCG, will be fixed. Because you can be able to play whatever you want to play. It will be an absolute free-for-all. Everything is on the table. There will be no graphs to be able to say what is the best deck or what is really, really good, because no one will know. Creativity is going to shine even more, and it's going to be a great time to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So I am very excited for where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is right now. I am excited for where we are right now, and I'm excited for the ban list, because whatever happens on the next ban list in the TCG, we as players are going to be huge winners. Unlike the OCG where they have all the negates around, we have no negates around here. So any support that comes in future sets has to stand on its own. There's no Omni negates to give you a helping hand. There's no cheating with Omni negates. No guiding hand. Nothing. Players have to figure out how to play these archetypes pure, and we actually get to see what these archetypes do with their actual playstyles. I believe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to be much more interesting in the TCG, as we will see archetypes with various amounts of playstyles doing their playstyles and not playing the same way every single time. Part of the reasons why I've always said we need to get rid of Omni Negates is because they dilute Yu-Gi-Oh! And they basically destroy the creative archetypes that Konami keeps making every single year in every single set. When every archetype does the same thing because of negates, then that's not really a fun and interesting game. However, when negates are no longer in the game, then every deck will be interesting. Players can now look at decks, get decks, and nothing is really going to be very expensive going forward, because an archetype would only be expensive if it was able to put out a generic Omni Negate. But because Omni Negates would no longer exist, theoretically anyway, as I like to call it, when we get our next ban list, Yu-Gi-Oh! Will be in a great place. So let's go to the conclusion.
Final chapter.
And here we are at the overall conclusion. So what do I want to say about where Yu-Gi-Oh! Is right now? I want to say we are in a very good place. I think the ban list, what we get for the ban list in TCG is going to be extremely interesting. It's a win-win situation no matter what happens. Because for the first time, I would say, in TCG history, we're not in a position where a ban list does a bad thing for the game. We're in a position that no matter what happens, no matter what decision Konami makes for the ban list in TCG, it's just a good thing. Because whether it would be the banning, or whether we follow the OCG and ban Abyss Dweller, or we stick to our policy and ban the Omni Negates, that we have in the game. I personally think we should stick to our stance that we had in 2024 and ban the Omni Negates. I definitely feel that is something that is better for the game, banning negates rather than letting I think Abyss Dweller should be allowed to exist. I'd rather face an Abyss Dweller than face a Ryziel board with Desiree any step of the way. Desiree is a problem that gatekeeps. We don't want gatekeeping, we want more chaos in our competitive scene. I want a competitive scene where everything can compete, where there's nothing that is left on the table, where there is like it is not predictable. That's the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Should be in the competitive scene in my eyes. It should be absolute chaos, where anyone can bring anything to the competitive scene, and there's no way you can predict what the meta is going to be. I hate that when the competitive scene is formulated, when the competitive scene has been figured out, and the best decks are always the same few decks. I feel that destroys creativity, and that destroys gameplay. I especially like in Europe when we had recently, obviously in the Birmingham YCS, with Dean Cowboy topping with Fire Kings. That was absolutely fantastic. Where Ryziel and Malice were seen to be the best decks, but Fire King just went and just took it away. This to me is what I want to see in Yu-Gi-Oh! More often. This should be a common thing, and it should be something I want to see in every aspect. I want to see creativity shine more. I want to see creativity shine more over gameplay. Creativity is why most of us play card games, in my eyes anyway. And so if more of us are able to be creative, and if more of us are not punished for being creative, then I think the competitive scene can just become much more interesting in Yu-Gi-Oh! And can definitely attract more people to this game. Because in my eyes, Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't a bad game. And in fact, I think this latest ban list, if it is done right in TCG, can and should be able to make Yu-Gi-Oh! Into a really good card game and make Yu-Gi-Oh! Great again. I've said it, yes. This ban list that we get to the TCG, if it is done right, can actually make Yu-Gi-Oh! Great again. And I can actually, with full confidence, advertise Yu-Gi-Oh! To a new audience. Because there is so much good that is happening in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Well, that's all I've got to say. Tune in next time as I'll talk about more things on this channel. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.